Hello listeners, I'm Moosejaw Matt, and I have a riddle for you, right here at the beginning of the show. There was an animal that lived in Pennsylvania, but it no longer exists. And yet, its kind still remains. What in the world am I talking about? Stay tuned and find out in about 20 or 30 seconds. Now that you're back, you're going to have to wait a little bit longer than 20 or 30 seconds, actually, because I need some background information. In 1913, President Theodore Roosevelt sent a letter to John M. Phillips. John Phillips was one of Pennsylvania's premier conservationists. That means he wanted to conserve things. He wants to conserve nature. And if you know anything about President Theodore Roosevelt, he was interested in the same thing. He wanted to conserve what was best about America: nature, wildlife, and that wilderness experience. So this is interesting because he wrote a letter to John Phillips in Pennsylvania expressing his excitement about something. Something was being released into Pennsylvania. Before I go any farther with that, let's go back to the riddle. Something used to exist in Pennsylvania that no longer exists. That was the eastern elk. The eastern elk was a species of elk that lived in Pennsylvania and other places in the eastern United States. The name makes sense. However, by the end of the Civil War, they had all been hunted into extinction. Now, what in the world is Moosejaw Matt talking about, where he said they no longer exist and yet their kind is still in Pennsylvania? Like, this doesn't make sense. Well, it will now, because the Pennsylvania Game Commission introduced 177 Rocky Mountain elk into 10 counties in the state. And that's what President Teddy Roosevelt, was writing to John Phillips about. That's what he was excited about. He was excited because they were releasing Yellowstone elk in Pennsylvania. In fact, here's a copy of the letter right in front of me that I'm going to read, dated January 21, 1913. Almost exactly 111 years ago. 111 years, a month, and 8 days. Here is what Teddy Roosevelt wrote.
Dear Phillips, I heartily favor the action of your sportsman league in fighting for the preservation of Pennsylvania's game.
And he ends with,
I am extremely pleased that my friend Howard Eaton has just delivered a carload of Yellowstone elk in Pennsylvania. Sincerely yours, Theodore Roosevelt.
That was to John Phillips, the conservationist. They were working together to bring Rocky Mountain elk to Pennsylvania. Apparently, in his own words, a carload of elk. The mental imagery is rather hilarious. He wrote,
Howard Eaton has just delivered a carload of Yellowstone elk in Pennsylvania.
A carload of elk. Can you imagine them? Buckled in the back seat? I certainly hope they were buckled. If not, and they were in an accident, that would be trouble. But the elk were delivered, and so in Pennsylvania now, there are elk that roam freely. In fact, there's a whole county called Elk County, appropriately enough. And those elk are not eastern elk, but Rocky Mountain, or what used to be known as Yellowstone elk. It all makes sense. So now you know the fuller story behind how elk are in Pennsylvania. Speaking of elk, we have 2 birthdays. I want to say happy birthday to Emma and Heidi. I think you both are having birthdays at this time of the year. Emma, Heidi, I hope your birthdays are fabulous. May you find life wonderful and wild, and even the difficulties, a time to grow and overcome. Well, I'm Moosejaw Matt. Until next time, keep buckling your elk in the back seat. Yeah, keep them safe. As they say, click it or ticket.